It was November 14th, 1902, and President Theodore Roosevelt was hunting near Onward, Mississippi. Roosevelt had been invited to go hunting by Mississippi Governor Andrew Longino. Theodore was an avid hunter. Despite a weak constitution when he was young and notably bad eyesight, he had lived an active life that included 2 years running his ranch in North Dakota, where he had become so accustomed to hunting that he published 3 books on hunting and ranching between 1885 and 1896. But that day Roosevelt had little luck finding game, even though most of the other participants had. His attendants went to find game for him. They used hounds to run down a black bear, which they clubbed once it was cornered and then tied to a tree. They then suggested that the president shoot the bear, but Roosevelt refused, saying it would be unsporting. Still, he ordered that someone else kill the bear, as it was injured and suffering, to put it out of its misery. The famous story, which made national news at the time, inspired a toy manufacturer to market stuffed toy bears under the name Teddy's Bear, using the famous nickname that Theodore Roosevelt never preferred, and creating one of the most popular toys in world history. The Mississippi hunt also represented the complex relationship the nation's 26th president had with animals. Roosevelt was both a naturalist and an avid, at times prolific, hunter. He started collecting and preserving specimens as a child. In fact, the charter for the American Museum of Natural History was drafted in his family's living room. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., was one of the museum founders, in part to encourage his son's passion. His collection was eventually shared between the museum and the Smithsonian Institution. Roosevelt passed his passion on to his children, resulting in the most bizarre menagerie to ever be in the White House. A 1908 newspaper wrote that there is no home in Washington so full of pets of high and low degree as is the White House. And those pets not only occupy the attention of the children, but the president is himself their good friend and has a personal interest in every one of them. While in office, Roosevelt and his children kept a dazzling array of unique creatures at the White House, including this one-legged rooster. Slippers, a cat with 6 toes on each foot, was famous for lounging around in the middle of formal dinners. Roosevelt found it easier to escort guests around the cat than to move it. In addition to 5 guinea pigs and 10 dogs, they had a California horned toad called Bill the Lizard, and daughter Alice kept a garden snake named Emily Spinach. Jonathan, the piebald rat, was described as particularly friendly. Son Archie's favorite was a Shetland pony named Algonquin, one of 2 ponies kept by the Roosevelts at the Executive Mansion. A gift from the Secretary of the Interior, Algonquin was imported from Iceland and a favorite of the press corps. In 1903, when Archie was suffering from the measles, his brothers took the 350-pound pony up the White House elevator to cheer his spirits. Then there was Josiah. In 1903, Roosevelt was on a railroad tour in the American West when, while in Sharon Springs, Kansas, 12-year-old Pearlie Gorsuch asked the President of the United States perhaps the most awesome question ever asked of the American executive. She asked, "Would you like a badger?" Being Theodore Roosevelt, of course he wanted the 2-week-old badger she offered. In fact, he said of the acquisition, "Bother politics, this last day in Kansas is the best of them all." In a letter to his children, he described the only known presidential badger as very good-tempered and waddles around everywhere like a little bear. Back at home, Josiah had the run of the White House, where the president's daughter Ethel described adorable antics like shredding furniture with his sharp little claws and chasing the gardener up a tree. Shockingly, however, as the badger aged, he developed an ugly temper, would often hiss like a tea kettle, and so had to be sent to the Bronx Zoo. Josiah was not, however, the first of Roosevelt animals to be sent to the zoo. His pet, Jonathan Edwards, didn't quite make it to the White House. A gift from a supporter in West Virginia, the American black bear had already proved himself to be somewhat difficult, while Roosevelt was still serving as governor of New York. The bear, described as small, was also, according to Roosevelt, queer-tempered. The name Jonathan Edwards referred to an ancestor of Roosevelt's wife, an 18th century New Jersey minister most famous for his sermon, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," in which he argued that the wicked deserve to be cast into hell. And the bear had been given the name because he displayed, according to the Roosevelt children, Calvinist traits in his character. Roosevelt himself gave an inkling of what that might have meant when he noted that the bear added zest to life in more ways than one. And when the zoo agreed to take the bear later that year, after Roosevelt had assumed the vice presidency, he noted, the entire household breathed a sigh of relief. At the zoo, the donation is shown here on the Zoological Society's annual report, the bear was described as cranky, and the zoo noted that they had to keep him separated from young cubs. Roosevelt maintained his passion for animal conservancy in the White House, where he kept a detailed list of the birds seen in the White House grounds and about Washington during his administration. Some of those would have been birds in the White House. In addition to the one-legged rooster, the Roosevelt family also had a hen named Baron Spreckle, 2 macaws, Eli Yale and Loretta, and a pet barn owl that lived in the greenhouse, which was, somewhat ironically, eventually torn down to build the West Wing. When their rabbit, named Peter Rabbit, died, Roosevelt wrote his son Kermit that yesterday his funeral was held with proper state. Archie, in his overalls, dragged the wagon with the little black coffin in which poor Peter Rabbit lay. Mother walked behind as chief mourner, she and Archie solemnly exchanging tributes to the worth and good qualities of the departed. Then he was buried, with a fuchsia, over his little grave. As the president's passion for his pets became well publicized, world leaders started giving exotic pets as gifts, including one gift of 5 more bears and a zebra, all of which apparently were sent to zoos. But one peculiar gift came from Menelik II, the Emperor of Ethiopia, who sent 2 Abyssinian lion cubs and a hyena to the great ruler across the Atlantic. The Washington Times reported that Quentin and Archie were on pins and needles awaiting the arrival of the Abyssinian lions. The lion cubs, however, had a difficult sea voyage. One did not survive the trip, and the other was so injured that, after a brief visit to the White House, it was taken to the Bronx Zoo, where the cub had to be euthanized, having apparently suffered injuries during the trip. The hyena, however, although wobbly after the voyage, recovered well, and the Roosevelt children named it Bill. It had the run of the White House, where it begged for table scraps, and Roosevelt was said to have taught it tricks. But, as the Times reported, a full-grown hyena is not a pleasant pet to have around a house, and Bill was sent to the zoo, where he thrived. But as much as Roosevelt displayed a love of animals, he loved hunting them just as much. In one hunting trip in Colorado in January of 1901, Theodore Roosevelt killed 12 mountain lions. But his expedition to Africa on behalf of the Smithsonian after leaving office set that to shame. The expedition killed so many critters of all sizes that it took the Smithsonian Institution 8 years to catalog all the specimens. Among the big game animals killed were 17 lions, 3 leopards, 7 cheetahs, 9 hyenas, 11 elephants, 10 buffaloes, 11 black rhinos, and 9 white rhinos. In all, they collected over 10,000 specimens from bugs to elephants. However, the animals were killed in order to collect specimens for scientific use. Kills were spread out both geographically and over time so as to not affect the animal populations. And where rare animals, such as the white rhino, were taken, it was because scientists thought the species would not survive, and so there was a greater imperative to acquire specimens for science while they could. In response to critics, Roosevelt said, "I can be condemned only if the existence of the National Museum, the American Museum of Natural History, and all similar zoological institutions are to be condemned." That is not to say that hunting is incompatible with game preservation. Quite the opposite. Hunters are often very interested in preserving habitats and game. Roosevelt himself was an avid supporter of game preserves in Africa and an avowed environmentalist who played a substantial role in the protection of public lands here in the United States. But the man who made a toy famous because of the bear he would not shoot shot 10 bears in one hunting expedition in Colorado in 1905. And that is the complex relationship of a man who both loved and loved to shoot animals of all kinds. If you enjoyed this History Guy short, then feel free to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and check us out on Patreon, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and our merchandise on teespring.com.